This is an article by a usual interlocutor of mine on Twitter, Ostrovsky, and John Spencer, who blocked me on Twitter. He didn't like me, talking to him. So, Ostrovsky and Spencer say, this week Amnesty International released a 296-page report accusing Israel of committing, quote, genocide. This charge, no less than a modern-day blood libel, is just the latest attack in Amnesty's long-standing campaign of lawfare against and vilification of the state of Israel, having previously accused the Jewish state of the equally unfounded charge of apartheid. So, this is a claim that all countries that are accused by Amnesty have. Like, there's a famous anecdote in Peru where one of our presidents, Fernando Belaunde, received a letter from Amnesty International saying that Peruvian army men were torturing people in the Andes, which was absolutely true. And he turned to journalists, grabbed the letter, crumpled it up in a ball, threw it on the garbage, and said, in my government, Amnesty International letters go straight into the trash. This is always the case. Like, Amnesty is used to these attacks. This is nothing new. To be sure, this report, written under the guise of international law and human rights, is utterly baseless, replete with malicious lies and gross distortions of fact, as well as wholesale fabrications. The crime of genocide, coined in 1944 by the Polish Jewish Raphael Lemkin to describe the systematic extermination of Jews by the Nazis, is one of the most serious accusations that can be leveled in international law. To accuse Israel of genocide in Gaza is a grotesque and egregious subversion and weaponization of the very term itself. Bullet of Dreams. We discussed that in the beginning, but I can wrap it up towards the end and tell you what I think. So it is important to recognize that genocide is very clearly defined under Article 2 of the Genocide Convention to mean acts committed with intent to destroy, in whole or in part, a national, ethnic, racial, or religious group. The commission of genocide has nothing to do with the number of civilian casualties that occur in a conflict. The key element here is the need to possess relevant, quote, intent. So far, yeah, that is the definition of genocide. Whatever criticisms one may have of Israeli policies or IDF actions in Gaza, at no stage has Israel been seeking to destroy the people in Gaza. That is highly debatable, at the very least, considering that there's so much evidence of intent in the statements of Israeli leaders. But okay, whatever. Israeli leaders are directing military policy in accordance with the decisions of the War Cabinet, the Prime Minister, Defense Minister, yada yada. The intent of the operation in Gaza following October 7th is to eliminate Hamas by destroying its military and governing capabilities and to rescue hostages. So this is key. Because if this is the objective, then what Israel has done in Gaza makes no sense. Right? If you want to eliminate Hamas and rescue the hostages, you don't destroy the entire infrastructure of Gaza where those hostages are. You don't kill the hostages yourself when they are waving white flags and are naked, screaming in Hebrew that they are not attacking you. You don't engage in boycotting agreements that might release more hostages, more than the first agreement already released. So if we're talking about reasonable inferences here, it's not a reasonable inference that eliminating Hamas and releasing the hostages is the only reasonable inference for Israeli actions. You don't use a 2,000-pound bomb, a bomb that has a destructive radius of the size of a football stadium, if you are concerned with not killing your hostages. That's not reasonable. Right? So this idea that there's only one reasonable inference, and that is Israel wants to eliminate Hamas and rescue the hostages, that's not borne by the evidence. This is not a special operation to destroy Hamas. This is not a wholesale negotiation to free the hostages. You do not throw 2,000-pound bombs in heavily urban areas where you don't know if there's a hostage there if your objective is to save the hostages. There has to be another inference that you can make from that behavior. Right? So they say these are both entirely legitimate military objectives and under the laws of armed conflict. They are. But then your behavior is not explainable through that inference, through those objectives. What you are doing to Gaza and Palestinians in Gaza is not consistent with I just want to kill Hamas. because, I mean, this doesn't look like a rescue operation. It looks like the complete extermination of Palestinians. It looks like you are creating conditions on the ground that make it impossible for Palestinians to exist in this land as a community, as a group, as such. And that is genocide. To the point where the ICC trial chamber has said that, yes, it does look like you are exterminating, that you are subjecting Palestinians to that kind of conditions of life. That's what they analyzed when they analyzed the crime of extermination. So from all that we've discussed, this cannot be the only reasonable inference to make from Israel's conduct. It just isn't. There's something else that can be inferred from that conduct. And this is in line with everything that the ICJ has said. That there have been civilian casualties in Gaza is tragic, but it is also the inevitable consequence of Hamas's using of its own people as human shields and embedding its military operations in schools, hospitals, kindergartens, and homes. Again, let's imagine for a second that the only accusation here was you're killing too many Palestinians. If that were the only accusation, then we would have, this would have some level of merit. Some not a lot. Because still, to what a degree are you using civilians as human shields when you attack positions with 2,000-pound bombs? Again, you are throwing a bomb with a destruction radius of a football stadium and the damage radius of like hundreds of like meters on a civilian population. So that's how you're killing people. Usually in their homes while they're sleeping with a program that's called Where's Daddy? Right? So even just on this ground of you're killing too many people, I'm not sure that you can argue that every single death of every Palestinian is because they're being used as human shields in this like meme-like interpretation of like, oh, there's a Hamas fighter with a baby in front. That's just not how it works when you're throwing a 2,000-pound bomb. That scenario just isn't borne by the evidence of using 2,000-pound bombs. So even if you can claim that there are instances where Hamas is using civilians as human shields, okay, sorry, that still does not explain why you're using 2,000-pound bombs and why you're hitting people in their houses when they're sleeping next to their children at night with a system called Where's Daddy? But this isn't the only accusation. The other accusation is that what Israel is doing is subjecting Palestinians to conditions of life that will lead to their destruction as a group. Right? That's the definition of genocide. So, in that scenario, this section here of human, that's irrelevant. Because what we're focusing here is on the starvation, on the destruction of homes through bulldozers, by the use of private companies, on the wholesale looting of Palestinian property, soldiers wearing underwear, soldiers detonating universities on a whim without a military necessity in place, said so by the soldiers themselves, destroying vital infrastructure. This doesn't make sense in the context of the evidence that we have. There has to be another inference than, oh, we want to destroy Hamas and Hamas uses human shields. What you are doing is not the conduct of someone that is facing an enemy that is using human shields. Because an enemy that is using human shields is usually restrictive in what they do. They can do less because there's human shields. You're doing more, killing a bunch of people. Okay, so they continue. Notwithstanding the complex challenge of operating in such a difficult environment, the IDF has gone to extraordinary lengths not seen in modern warfare to abide by the principles of international humanitarian law and avoid harm to civilians in Gaza. I don't see how anyone can argue this at this point. But again, even if that were the case, even if when you have a soldier with a Galil, automatic weapon, and they are ordered to take specific precautions, that's not all that we're talking about. We're also talking about the destruction of infrastructure, the subjection of Palestinians, the creation of conditions of life that subject the Palestinians to the impossibility of existence as a nation. So they continue, this has included implementing historic measures to prevent civilian harm, such as advanced alerts, which have been proven time and time again to be extremely confusing and ineffective by a lot of actors, to provide, to provide early warning and temporary evacuations. Evacuations to where? If you evacuate someone, this is what Israel did to the Israeli citizens in the north. They evacuated them to hotels. That's what you do when you evacuate. You evacuate people somewhere. Palestinians were not evacuated because they weren't evacuated anywhere. There was no infrastructure in place to receive them. They were displaced. They were forcefully transferred, and that's a war crime. So this temporary evacuation is senseless. It's not an evacuation because they're not being evacuated to anywhere in specific. There's no infrastructure. This is what the ICJ asked Israel in the case, the South Africa's case. There's nowhere where they can go. There's no infrastructure to receive them. Daily pauses of fighting, this is ridiculous. Distributing of maps to civilians, which again have been proven to be unreliable. Using precision weapons, 2,000-pound bombs are not precision weapons. As well as facilitating daily provision of aid. Again, the US has said that Israel is withholding aid. In fact, to demonstrate just how utterly ludicrous Amnesty's accusation of genocide is, one only needs to see that, according to the CIA World Factbook, the population in Gaza has actually increased 2% in the last year. This is the very opposite of seeking to destroy in whole or in part or in any way a group of people. Okay, so this is very funny because remember this part of the article? The commission of genocide has nothing to do with the number of civilian casualties that occur in a conflict. You said that in the same article. So how is this relevant at all? Population can grow or decrease during a genocide. That doesn't determine whether it is a genocide or not. The indigenous population of Canada increased throughout the 20th century. Throughout the 20th century, the Canadian Truth Commission has determined that they were being genocided, even while their population increased. But even if that were the case, the population of Gaza has not increased by 2%. This is an estimate. An estimate done using data before October 7th. This has been debunked online already. So this is a ludicrous claim, even if it were relevant, and it isn't, because as the authors themselves say it with me, the commission of genocide has nothing to do with the number of civilian casualties that occur in a conflict. This is bonkers levels of bad argument. Solar Defrag is right. A lot of Holocaust deniers use these types of arguments as well. So where were we? Perhaps knowing it doesn't leave a legal leg to. Perhaps knowing it doesn't have a. Perhaps knowing it doesn't have a legal leg to stand on, Amnesty has resorted to manufacturing its own definition of genocide. Again, we have seen how they haven't. They really haven't. Amnesty claims that the universally established and the sole accepted definition, legal definition, as outlined in the Genocide Convention in 1948, which requires the existence of intent, is an overly cramped interpretation of international jurisprudence. So this is wrong. Amnesty does not claim that the legal definition of the Genocide Convention is overly cramped. That is just not what Amnesty said. Let's go back to what Amnesty said. Where is what Amnesty said? I had it here. The ICJ has said its rulings, the ICJ's rulings are or can be interpreted in overly cramped ways. So Amnesty never said that the definition of genocide in the Genocide Convention was an overly cramped interpretation of international jurisprudence. That's just a false claim. It's not true. It's not just Israel. That finds this redemption ridiculous. In an absolutely scathing rebuke, even Amnesty's own Israel office has totally rejected Amnesty International's report, saying it was a predetermined conclusion based on biased and artificial analysis of the situation in Gaza and motivated by a desire to support a popular narrative among Amnesty International's target audience. In fighting, there's nothing you can do about it. Not everyone is happy. But at least from reading what they are saying, There's nothing new here. There's nothing new. So, sure, maybe Amnesty Israel is not happy. I mean, I guess. Like, everyone that's reading this report is concluding, well, but this is just applying a legal standard. You can disagree with the standard, but you cannot tell me that this is like motivated to support a popular narrative. It's not a narrative, it's a legal interpretation. So yeah, again, this is weak stuff for me. If anyone is guilty of genocide here, it is Hamas. Not only does Hamas openly state that the destruction of Israel is its ultimate goal, as evidenced in the charter, it acted out on those intentions on October the 7th, when Hamas massacred over 1,200 Israelis in a rampage that included raping, burning, mutilating, executing, and abducting women and children. We stood in the kibbutzim and the communities in the south of Israel and saw firsthand the death and destruction. That is where the real attempt at genocide occurred. I've already said this. I'm all in favor of having the conversation about whether October 7th qualifies as a genocide. But then you would need to use these arguments. You would need to use the same standard. You would need to use the standard that you are saying is illegitimate to analyze whether Hamas had genocidal intent, and not abstract intent, like specific intent with regards to October 7th, and that those orders were carried out specifically by the militants of Hamas with a genocidal intent. So either they wanted to destroy Israelis as such, or they knew that what they were doing would lead to the destruction as such of Israelis and still didn't stop. Right? So I'm more than happy to have that conversation. I'm not sure we can now because the people that were in charge have sort of been killed by Israel. But again, you would need to use the standard that you are telling me here in this very article that is illegitimate. In an interview last year, shortly after the massacre, senior Hamas official Gaza Hamad admitted that the terror group would repeat the October 7th massacre again and again until Israel was annihilated, openly admitting the group's genocidal intentions, but Amnesty has completely disregarded this, instead absolving and whitewashing the heinous actions of Hamas. This is a falsehood because Amnesty has its own October 7th investigation going on, and it has produced several reports on October 7th. So this is just a lie. The incoming Trump administration should decree Amnesty a hate group and adopt blistering sanctions against them, including withdrawing financial support and any cooperation with governing agencies. So basically authoritarianism. Regrettably, Amnesty International, once a storied human rights organization, they always say this. I always supported Amnesty until they came after me. If you support them until they come after you, then you don't really support them. Has lost all credibility, becoming nothing more than a propaganda mouthpiece for murderers and rapists of Hamas. Again, they have a lot of reports criticizing Hamas. So how is this reasonable at all is beyond me. So again, this article is sort of like empty of content. It's empty of content.